Good evening, and thank you all so much for attending tonight's conversation. My name is Asante Malik, and I'm the program curator at the Stuart Hall Foundation, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the latest installment of the SHS Reconstruction Work Program. Stuart Hall discussed Reconstruction as an opportunity to reinscribe the past, reactivate it, relocate it, and resignify it in order to work through the present, reinterpret the future, and to imagine something else. Our Reconstruction Work series implements Hall's thinking through a series of online public conversations where we invite writers, artists, and activists to critically consider how we can build a better society in the aftermath of the COVID-19 crisis and the Black Lives Matter protests worldwide. The state backlash against the mass protests for racial justice in June 2020 is well underway. A reaction punctuated by the recent passing of the Police Crimes and Sentencing Bill, which has increased the maximum penalty for criminal damage to a memorial from 3 months to 10 years, amongst other things. As the state rushes to protect its memorials, this conversation focuses on questions of memory to ask who gets to speak for the past. For this next event in the Reconstruction Work series, the Stuart Hall Foundation welcomes two brilliant artists and educators, Barby Asante and Shawn, to discuss the ways in which events can be remembered and misremembered as a way to interrogate the politics of memory. Barby Asante is a London-based artist, curator, and educator. Her work is concerned with the politics of place, spatial memory, and the history and continuing legacies of colonialism and slavery. Barbie's work is collaborative, performative, and dialogic, often working with groups of people as contributors, collaborators, or co-researchers. She resists the idea that the stories of otherness, in quotes, are alternatives to dominant narratives. For her, these stories and narratives are interruptions, utterances and presences within the dominant, invisible, unheard, missing, or ignored. By making these narratives and stories visible, asking questions and making proposals, she is interested in what these possibilities offer as we examine our present and envision our futures. With a deep interest in liberatory Black feminist and decolonial methodologies, Asante embeds within her work notions of collective study, countless ways of knowing and dialogical practices that embrace being together and breathing together as a grounding for working together, creatively and as a way to think about social change and transformation. And Dr. Shawn Sobers is a professor of cultural interdisciplinary practice, at the University of West England. He is a filmmaker, photographer, writer, and lecturer. His research is primarily concerned with the use of media and arts in participatory education, advocacy, heritage, marginalized voices, and untold stories. He has chapters and articles published in peer-reviewed journals and books, and has spoken to at a wide range of conferences. Shawn's research has spanned a wide range of diverse topics, from the use of youth media in informal education, through to using media as an ethnographic research tool, exploring subjects such as the legacy of the slave trade, through to disability issues and walking and Rastafari culture. He co-founded Firstborn Creatives production company in 1999 and has made programs for BBC One, ITV West, and Channel 4. Much of Shawn's work is positioned within the discourse of participatory methodologies, community media, autoethnography, and visual anthropology. Shawn was also a member of the Bristol History Commission and one of the consultant curators of the Colston statue display at the Shed Museum. This event was produced in partnership with CODE, the Center of the Dynamics of Ethnicity. CODE is an ESRC-funded research center providing theoretically informed, empirically grounded, and policy-relevant research on ethnic inequalities in the UK. They bring together expertise from a range of disciplines, including sociology, demography, economics, history, geography, political science, cultural studies, and seek to communicate their research to a wide range of audiences. And just so our audiences know, live captions are available by clicking the CC button in the Zoom bar, and the audience Q&A will take place after the discussion. So please submit questions or comments using the Q&A box. Please do this. There's always seems to be a panic just before the end of the conversation, then all the questions start flooding in. So please keep them coming as the event progresses, as the conversation progresses. And we will answer them at the end. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to welcome Barby Asante and Shawn Sobers to begin their discussion. Enjoy, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ulsa.
Thank you, Ulsa. Hi, Shawn.
Hi, Barbie. Hi, good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Good to see everyone here as well. Welcome, everybody, this evening.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to be here. It's been a bit of a frazzling day, but as Shawn and I were both talking about marking today, which has been a bit crazy. And we haven't seen each other in person since 2019 when I came to teach in Bristol. So
you came down and talked to my MA photography students, which was amazing. They still talk about that.
Okay.
About that work in the MA exhibition there, which was fantastic for them to see that. And I mean, as you say, we're both a bit frazzled, and we're going to be gentle but robust with each other.
Right, definitely.
but just to let the audience know as well, this isn't planned. It's not scripted. We don't have a list of questions. We're just going to rip off each other and see where we go. I mean, we were given this title, this first question of who speaks from the past, who decides what is memorialized and how is it done. I mean, I don't know if you had any initial thoughts on that kind of question or what that makes you think about.
Well, it makes me think about silence. It makes me think about the book Silence in the Past, and with my frazzled brain trying to remember the person that wrote it, French name. But anyway, it makes me think about how history, it makes me also think about how history is written. Who it's written by is often those people who yield certain kinds of power, and the kind of ways in which that power is kind of I suppose is kind of put upon others. I was reading an article, my cousin sent me an article about that seems to have disappeared. It was about Windrush, and kind of the laws that were put in place in terms of the kind of immigration laws that were kind of absolutely, totally and utterly anti-Black all the way along. And while I was reading this article, thinking about certain ones, but thinking about one in particular, the one, my own family, and my own family's arrival, while I was just thinking about those different dates that were in. So I think there was a bill that was put in 68, and then 71, which would have been the year that my sister and I were born. And really sort of thinking about how the history intersects. And I was also reading the comments and just kind of really struck by how people understood that relationship that we have to this place, and how that history is written. So, we're actually in the Jubilee week. I think that's the kind of interesting time, and just to think about that in relation to our presence, and how I was kind of listening to also doing my biog, and I was thinking, gosh, did I say that? Those things about memory.
I was thinking the same, right? Mine.
I know, there's always this way, isn't it? The interruptions. Am I thinking about the kind of the other histories or other layers of history as being interruptions and utterances? Maybe I'm also thinking about what's in between as screams and shouts, and in a very sort of audible but not audible way, that which is not said, that it does become said in our presence here, and perhaps is the disruption that wants to kind of continually perpetuate a kind of empire type history, So yeah, I mean, there's lots that could be said there and not be thought about. I mean, Shawn, what do you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that bit of your bio, because I tuned into the same thing actually. It was the line before that when Orsted said that you don't view these histories as alternative, they're interruptions. And absolutely, I tuned into that, because what that first question made me think about, who speaks for the past, who decides what is memorialized and how it's done. It made me think about even my motivation as, going to art school. I left school for very bad GCSEs. Art was the only thing I
only got art.
Sliver of possibility to
I got English as well,
right,
and they were C's. They were
yeah. And it when it made me think about my motivation as a creative. Do you know what I mean? And why I'm really passionate about telling the stories that I do within, the quote unquote Black experience, Black history, however you want to label it. And it's to circumvent that question. Do you know what I mean? Because we, as artists, we have it with it, and writers and researchers, is that agency to create something out of nothing, to tell the stories that we want to tell, and to circumvent that I guess that hierarchy of that canon, who tells the story, who tells the history, who puts up statues, so making a painting, doing sculpture, whatever it might be, writing a poem. It just gives us a sense of that kind of that possibility of telling those histories and to create those interruptions. And it's not left to someone else to tell the story, to tell our story about us, that we're telling it ourselves, and that's what I'm always very passionate about in education and in creativity. And that's why I'm kind of drawn to community practice, participatory practice. It's about us telling our own stories, people telling their own stories, and that's definitely something that's gone through my career, and it comes back to that central question again. Absolutely.
With me, I think it's I love what you're saying there, but I think for me, how I sort of came to sort of working with memory was really seeing actual problems in how kind of the kind of wider culture actually deals with our memories, deals with them or believes them. I mean, even I'm talking about even a memory. If I told a story of, what it was like when I was growing up and the National Front used to sit outside of my school and give out leaflets, and they used to, threaten small children, people would be like, no, like, yes, no, so my memories. So I'm also thinking about it on the kind of multi-layered way in which we think about memories, and not just the events or the kind of these like really supposedly significant things. I'm thinking about the things that are the interior life, and the things that we would try to remember or maybe even try to forget because they're traumatizing. So I think it's in 2006, I was working on a project. I was invited to work on a project at the Photographers Gallery. And the project was kind of bringing together a collection of photographs by a photographer called Harry Jacobs, who had a studio in Landor Road in Brixton. Now, what was so absolutely interesting for me on that one was the fact that the photographs, basically, he was closing the studio and the photographs ended up in the skip. He had been on Landor Road for, I think, more than 50 years, since the late 1950s. So he was recording the weddings, deaths, births, anniversaries, the day-to-day, kind of the photos that you would see of the Afro-Caribbean community in that area. So there was this exhibition that happened because this person had rescued the sort of negatives, and I was invited then to, what they realized was that they couldn't actually put out these photographs without permissions, and so for me, I think what happened was then I was invited to be this researcher, to go and kind of find people that had their photos taken. And I got into this this sort of sensibility of memory. It was like that was related to these photographs, people who didn't have them anymore, and whose memories didn't seem to be seem to be valid or valued. And in fact, actually, the way that I thought that the organization approached the memory was almost so materially that it forgot that there were actually people behind it. That there were people that had lived these lives. And I kind of get worried about us just kind of, sometimes I get worried about the whole idea of us like living in sort of social history and not real life. I don't know if you've got anything to respond to that.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I've just finished a piece of writing, actually. It's about domestic space and memories of like my family house growing up and the houses of my family friends or parents' friends. And one of the things I write about is the photo wall that was curated by my mum, and I use the word curated very deliberately. She was a nurse, and she wouldn't ever say she was an artist or photographer or curator, but that's exactly what she was in our family. She would. I never remember my dad picking up a camera. It is my mum. My mum put them all up on the wall, and I kind of write about how in all our domestic spaces we're surrounded often by photographs that are very familiar to us on one hand. There might be our parents' wedding, whatever. But at the same time, they're also very unfamiliar to us when we actually start meditating on them. Who was that? Who's related to who? And our generation, we're now inheriting these pieces of these memories, these very treasured kind of artifacts, archives. And I'm very passionate about interviewing our parents, interviewing our grandparents, interviewing the elders around us, and I feel that we talk about the oral history tradition, and I'm very passionate about that we and our generation reconnect and do that intergenerational kind of work, and that, I'm not saying we all have to do it like a manifesto, but that's part of what I do in my practice and my research now, is try to create those bridges of conversation to try to to start to embody some of that knowledge, because our generation now, we're now coming up, our parents are getting older, and we're in that kind of process now. So I guess it's that facing our own kind of mortality, if you like, and that responsibility of these histories. However, what are we passing on? What are we doing? And I find that quite an interesting tension, I suppose.
However, I'm quite sort of just a couple things that I'm thinking of there. So I think about that wall. I think it's really, really interesting that you bring it up, and I'm wondering whether these become our own personal sort of monuments, or our own kind of, the wall becomes that monument to the family history. I'm also thinking about how there is such a power in, and I've recently had a piece that I wrote for Photography and Culture that's kind of just come out, and where I think about countless ways of knowing. And I want to go back to the idea of trauma and memory and the things that one doesn't say, and just thinking about, say, one of those photographs, and how Toni Morrison talks about, I think it's Sula, being influenced by a photograph of someone she believes was her mother's friend, and how she sort of builds a whole narrative around that. So there's something for me also as well around troubling the ways in which we believe memory is supposed to occur because we've arrived in the West, and the way that the West writes history is in a particular way. So now, when you watch I don't know, those programs where people go off and trace their history, you almost got to find the heroes, and you've got to find this, and it's all that. But I think one of the things that's really interesting when I'm talking about the kind of audible in between, the sonic moment where there's a scream in between or something like that, is the thing that you can't contain with memory. Memory is never reliable. Even history is not reliable. It's told by the people who have power, so it's not reliable. So memory is not reliable. And how we can learn and create through the fragments, and how we can think about you know, like kind of actions of care or learning from memory. I mean, I think, you know, on about earlier conversations, we talked about how I was kind of thinking about Sankofa from my own like cultural background as of being Ghanaian, and hearing it and not kind of having it as a monument, but hearing it as an everyday practice, because that's what I used to hear Sankofa every day almost as a child when I didn't, you know, messed the room up or whatever. It's kind of everyday language. And I kind of wonder about, and maybe this kind of moves us into sort of thinking about some of maybe the work that you've done around the Colston statue or whatever. I'm sort of wondering about the actions that we take that are, you know, kind of following those same kind of monumental models of memorial. You know, I'm thinking that actually, you know, through sort of independence movements and all these kinds of people erected statues, you know, how nowadays we're so troubled with memory that, you know, particularly for me from a Ghanaian background, you know, the funeral is like an epic occasion, which is like so epic. People will come out. You need to bring 45,000 for a funeral, you know. It's incredible to me. So I don't know how I'm sort of segueing into it, but I'm just trying to think about how maybe I'm thinking a little bit because I was just reading a bit of Audre Lorde, and I was thinking about the master's tools and whether it will actually liberate us. And maybe I can start there. And then could you perhaps tell us a little bit about your, you know, like we all know about the statue coming down in 2020 in Bristol, but then you were involved in an exhibition, right? And can you tell us a little bit more about it? And I don't know, I might interrogate you, Shawn.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind.
Do, because,
I feel like it might be quite a nice thing to bring into this conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to put it in context really as well, because, you know, part of my, you know, in terms of my research and work into Bristol specifically and its connection with transatlantic slavery, I mean, that goes back 1998, 1997. Do you know what I mean? It's been a continual, I guess, part of one of the channels of my practice, even before I became an academic, when I was making films for TV and all that kind of thing, with my colleague, particularly Rob Mitchell. So, and I have to take it back there because in 1999, that was really a kind of what in Bristol was kind of seen as a real moment in Bristol in terms of official recognition of slavery, in terms of the city marking that history. So there's a few things that happened in 1999. One was resistance to, happened a few years before 1996, I think, but resistance to the Cabot 500 celebrations that happened in Bristol when John Cabot went over to Newfoundland and, you know, discovered Newfoundland. There was the Festival of the Sea in Bristol, which was a big celebration of Bristol's maritime history, not a single mention of transatlantic slavery. A bridge opened in Bristol and it was named Perrow's Bridge. And anyone who knows the city centre, knows where the Onofini was, would see this big horn bridge. And John Perrow was an African who was working for John Pinney in the Georgian House, which is just off Park Street. And then Mads Dresser and other kind of scholars of the day saw it fit to name the bridge Perrow's Bridge in recognition of this African. That was the very first acknowledgement of an African in the city. And then also in 1999, the city put on Respectable Trade, which was in the museum, and it was trying to tell the story of Bristol's connection with transatlantic slavery. And that had more visitors than any exhibition before, and it was only surpassed in 2017, whenever the Banksy exhibition came to Bristol. That's the only time it's had more footfall. So myself and Rob Mitchell made a film about these happenings in Bristol, and it became Under the Bridge, and it was broadcast on ITV. Part of that forgive the preamble, but it's important I put it in context, because the Colston statue and that name Colston is so embedded in Bristol, I guess, you know, conversation around slavery. It's hard to separate it out. So part of that documentary, I interviewed Tony Forbes, who's a Black artist, or he passed away sadly last year, God rest his soul, but Tony Forbes, Bristolian, and he was disgusted by how the Festival of the Sea just omitted any mention of transatlantic slavery. And if you've got browsers open, Google Tony Forbes sold down the river, it's called. There's a painting called Sold Down a River. And in that painting, the Colston statues behind him, chaining him up, dragging him into the River Avon and basically bringing him to his death, sort of thing. And he just talks about, and in the interview talks about how it's disgusting that the statue's there, that it's been, lauded, etc., and it's been celebrated. So this has been the kind of continual thing. And in 2019, I wrote a research paper around the Sold Down the River painting by Tony Forbes and the statue, because the Tony Forbes painting was bought by the city in 1999, and it's in display in the Shed Museum. And I kind of did this analysis where, to see the Colston statue, you could be on a bus, you could be minding your own business, but it's there. It's a part of the fabric of the city. It's a piece of architecture, grade 2 listed. You see it whether you want to or not. Whereas the statue, as powerful as it is, and it's very powerful, to see it, you have to be in the first floor in a certain corner of the Shed. You know what I mean? And you have to be purposefully kind of seeing it. You don't just bump into it.
Oh, you mean the painting, right?
The painting. Yeah, the painting. And when I wrote that in 2019, I didn't know what was happening in 2020. So I wrote that in the sense that the statue, the painting, even though it's in permanent display, as we know, permanent doesn't really mean anything in that context. The lead curator of the Shed could decide to take it down tomorrow and it just enter the collection. But what I was writing about then was that the statue is permanent, and it's how the city wants to see itself and the narrative that it wants to tell. But then fast forward, then 6 months later, and the thing gets toppled. Obviously, it's not as permanent as as anyone was thinking. And I myself have gone on a journey with that statue. I was more in favour of a plaque, the wording on a plaque being put there to recontextualize it, or a different sculpture or something being put up to tell a different story. I wasn't necessarily saying it had to be taken down. I was more in favour of it being recontextualized, if you like. But when the statue came down, I didn't miss it. I was glad. I was rejoicing in that youthful spirit that happened, kind of thing. But then when the mayor, the day after it toppled, and the mayor was on television, Mayor Marvin Rees, and he spoke to the camera and said, well, now we've got this statue and it's going to enter the museum, collect the museum service, it's going to be on display in the museum. That was the first any of us knew what he was thinking, in the sense that it would go into a museum. And as someone that spent the last 20 years of my career, telling stories about the legacy of transatlantic slavery, the feeling of what it's like to live in a city where this is a very pervasive narrative, going to school with the name Colston on your lapel of your jumper and on your bag, the psychological trauma that must cause you as a young person when you realize who Colston is. Even in my own children's school, they had a Colston, what's it called, a Colston house. And I had to tell the head teacher, I don't want my children going into that house in that school, So all of these things, it's so pervasive that when I was then asked to join the History Commission, and then asked by the curators of the Shed, based on my prior work, to have, to help them to display the Colston statue and to tell the story in context, that what happened in 2020 did not happen out of a vacuum. It wasn't mindless vandals, as some people in the media and in political realms tried to say. You know, they were there on a Black Lives Matter march in commemoration of George Floyd. They tore down the statue, put it in the water, went to listen to speeches, and they carried on. There's plenty other things in that area that they could have troubled, that are named Colston or named by other slavers, you know, but it's a very specific act. So I felt I had a responsibility that, as much as I'm sick, quite frankly, I'm sick to death of the Colston statue. Do you know what I mean? I don't really want anything to, but I had a responsibility based on my prior work and, you know, all these kind of things to actually tell the story in a wider context, that it wasn't just wanton vandalism, that you know, that is just one small chapter in this bigger narrative, which is about transatlantic slavery. And there's many more Colstons in Bristol, as there are in London, as there are in Glasgow, as there are in Liverpool, but they're all invisible. And more people know about Colston now, obviously, since he was torn down, rather than when he was there. So sorry for my long answer.
No.
As much as problematic as I see it, at the same time, I knew it wasn't one that I could run away from. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just a bit more eyeless, like I probably would have just gone, no, damp it. But I understand your responsibility, and perhaps that is to do with your positionality as well, as you say, within the city, and the fact that you have been in this kind of ongoing dialogue with the city in relationship to, you know, the legacies of slavery that persist in and are, you know, are present in Bristol and continue to be present in Bristol. You know, we know it very well in Bristol when you sort of visit them. But and I kind of, you know, I appreciate the painting that you're talking about, speaking back to this statue. I think we really ought to also acknowledge that when people went and marched in 2020, George Floyd was one of many people. And I think that, you know, that continued legacy of slavery and colonialism, which is, you know, kind of evidenced in sort of police violence, you know, we should kind of try to, I feel like we need to try and also kind of break the monumental language that comes with that, because actually, what do people call it? But June 2020 is like Black Lives Matter started in June 2020,
yeah,
and it didn't. And I think it's really key to kind of, you know, or that it started even in 2014. You know, I think
even the name Black Lives Matter, you know, there was
precisely. I mean, I think that this is like, you know, the ongoing legacies of anti-colonialism, which actually began as soon as they started, you know, colonizing places, where people, you know, and of course, let's think about those legacies in relation to, you know, the continued anti-Blackness and what we started with when thinking about Windrush. Yeah. I was just thinking about what you were talking about there, and plaques came to mind, and it made me think about making. I have a series of films that I've been working on, which are called The Queen and the Black-Eyed Squint, which kind of I'm not going to go really deeply into them, but if anyone is in or visiting Glasgow until the end of August, you can see 3 of my series of films in Goma, which is the Gallery of Modern Art in Glasgow, and so these films sort of reenact the visit of the first Miss Ghana to the UK in 1957, and it's kind of references a Pathé newsreel film, which you can find on YouTube, and so I wanted to sort of think about what I in 2017, when I first made these films, the first tour was in Newcastle, because it was in relation to a remembrance of the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King receiving an honorary doctorate at Newcastle University. So there was a big festival, and then there was this exhibition at Baltic called Starless Midnight, and I was commissioned to make some work, and I decided to birth this beauty queen character. and take her on a tour with Stuart Hall's wonderful Harriet Fleurot as my Miss Great Britain of Newcastle. We started with Newcastle, and it was interesting because there's a lot of colonial memory in Newcastle, but it's never actually said. And they sort of said to me, well, there's not a very big, diverse community in Newcastle, and there's not a lot of kind of evidence. But there was a lot of evidence when we did this tour, and just through also just thinking about the time, and thinking about industry and what would have fueled that industry, and plus in the center of Newcastle they have a big Earl Grey statue, and if you know anything about that, then he's really related to the Conservatives that were sort of related to or connected to the idea of abolition, but obviously for their own benefit.
Yeah.
But one of the second, I made 2 films at that time, and I wanted to kind of make reference to that because it's 5 years on June the 14th since the Grenfell Tower fire. And so I felt it was really necessary. I was in an exhibition with in Venice that year, 2017, with Khadija Say, and I was beginning to get to know her. We had a really lovely, we had even had time to we were going to set up a time to meet, which would have just been after the fire actually happened. So I felt it was really necessary to kind of do one of these tours of North Kensington. And it was very interesting going to North Kensington to think about how much I know this area since I was small, since the 1970s when my mum's friend's partner used to take us to Notting Hill Carnival. So I know the area very well. I've been involved in the carnival or going to the carnival ever since I was like 5 or 6. And Portobello Road Market, all kinds of stuff that I know. And going there and just kind of going, wow, there is nothing here there's nothing here that I can see. I mean, this is the gentrification, right? That I can visibly see that speaks to that memory that I have of this place. And so one of the devices that we used in the film was the plaques, the blue plaques.
Okay.
And all the blue plaques were put up by the Nubian Jack Society. So they were actually kind of an activist thing to put up these plaques because there were no actual official plaques in the area. So this is Ronnie Hazlitt, this is Frank Critchlow, this is Kelso Cochrane, who got killed up near where Trellick Tower is right now. And then we ended in this kind of in the kind of square where the sort of community sort of rested, or kind of provided sanctuary after the fire. So it was a very interesting thing, and it's interesting to think about how something like that then becomes memorialized. And actually, the kind of right now, the tower still being up, and it's covered, and still no kind of recovery for the pain, and there will be a silent march. Actually, I think that's what I want to say to think about, is the kind of more kind of I suppose like a very powerful gesture of remembrance, which happens in the silent marches that haven't happened for the last 2 years. But actually I'll start to kind of bring memory into a kind of physical experience, and a kind of embodied experience as well, that I'm kind of interested in that, because I also think as well, on those same streets that we walk on to do the silent marches are the same streets in which carnival happens, and that those streets, or not all of the streets, but actually some of the streets, but those streets also are alive with a different kind of remembrance for me, which kind of also brings me to a moment in 2020 when me and a few friends got together to read Orbise Phillips's Caravana as a remembrance to the carnival, like, which is such an incredible piece because it speaks to the movement on the street that holds history, which is more than, you know, this kind of entertainment on the street, but actually the history of slave rebellions, of, you know, of retentions, African retentions, of ways of coping with trauma, of ways of, like, you know, sort of being embodied and kind of embodying the sort of latent Africanness that kind of continue and will hopefully continue in August this year. But it's I don't know, I just wanted to kind of think about those as points of memory that are perhaps more performative and embodied, and probably more connected to sort of ritual and the kinds of ways that we might have remembered, going back to Sankofa, through you know, different means, rather than these kind of monumental, like, put up a statue kind of.
I think you're absolutely spot on in that, because, you know, if you think about, you know, within our traditions, whether it's music, you know, think about Strange Fruit or Redemption Song, or, you know, hip hop by KRS-One, or, you know what I mean, you know, different forms of memorialization, and, you know, dance, like you say, different dance traditions, different martial arts traditions, even poetry, you know, all these kind of things I see as memorialization. I think that word monument, we think of stone and bronze, but actually it's within culture. The whole Notting Hill Carnival itself is, like you say, is the form of memorialization. In Bristol, we got St. Paul's as well. And, you know, I did a film about the SS Mendy in 2017. The SS Mendy was a British steamship which was fighting for the British, in First World War, and it's transporting Black South African troops to the front line in France, on the Somme, and it travelled from Cape Town right up to the Isle of Wight, and it got to the edge of the Isle of Wight, and it got hit by an empty meat container ship, and 646 of the men died, most of them Black South African troops. So when I heard this, and the ship is still down off Isle of Wight today, you know. So when I first heard about the story of SS Mendy, I was like, how come I've never heard about this, you know? And then I felt, when I've got the opportunity, I need to make something to commemorate, to, you know. And in the film, it does exactly that. There's a dance, underwater dance, which is a form of memorialization. There's a poem that, you know, it goes through different chapters and different styles. It also has interviews with Black servicemen who fought for the British in, you know, Northern Ireland and various places. But they're also underwater, and I do an underwater photo shoot with them. When they were above water, I interviewed them, and they're talking about how it must have felt for those Black South African troops, you know, to die in that way. And so, and that's like an all history form of memorialization, I suppose, you know. And there are graves for some of those men. There are statues, and for one of them particularly. But I was more interested in those cultural forms of memorialization. You know, I think often we take them for granted, don't we? When we hear a song, and it might be, you know, even with Strange, you know, I guess Strange Fruit is now, we know that's a form of memorialization because it's been talked about for a long time. But I guess we take those things for granted, but they are even as or more powerful than, like you say, a bit of bronze or stone. They transcend into different ways. I mean, one thing that always makes me smile is that if I'm driving and I've got on, you know, even if it's like Radio 4 or Radio 2 or something like that, but then I hear a Bob Marley song and they're talking about Jah, Rastafari and Africa, and it just makes me start. I think you don't hear, you know, we're hearing these, what's the word? Evocations, I can't pronounce the word properly. Evocations, yeah, in a Sankofa spirit, in a way that you're not going to hear Christian music or maybe even Buddhist music, but we're hearing Africa being evoked, and you know, Do you see what I mean? And it always makes you smile and think, yeah, okay, this is.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I think I was watching something, sort of, being in the marking mode, you have to watch some Netflix thing, and there was someone putting a baby to sleep, and they were like, reggae is very useful for putting babies to sleep. So imagine, I mean, I used to put mine to sleep to which they are not, like, they're 27 now, but they to reggae, and they were really sort of, so they'll probably kill me for telling this story, but they were so into Mali, they used to watch the Time Will Tell video over and over again, and blew up our old TV set by pouring water in the back, because they thought that Mali was thirsty. But it's kind of your water thing makes me really think about being around water and thinking about that which is not where memory is held within the water. And I was recently in Madeira, and it's in the Atlantic, and I was going to this island of, that's Portuguese, and speaking a lot of, seeing the bananas and whatever, and then speaking about what is the history, looking it up and finding out that it's like, colonized in like the 1400s, which coincide with the colonization, or the not the colonization, but more the the scoping of the West African coast, particularly Ghanaian coast, where Elmina Castle was finished in 1482. So this kind of relationship with the sea and what it holds in terms of memory, when you think also that you talked about this ship, and this, I mean, the 600 is a lot of people. We think about the Zong as well, that Saint Orbise Philip, has done an incredible poem that is performed every year in remembrance of the slaves that were thrown overboard on that ship. I was really struck by going on the water to dolphin watch, and also being really aware of the depth of it, like it's how deep that Atlantic Ocean is, and that kind of impossibility of being able to really survive those waters. But yet somehow within those waters is a memory of a whole bunch of mine and your ancestors, of people who have lost their lives being transported, or sometimes even there's that scene, is it in I can't remember, because I know someone used it, I think it's either in Roots or Amistad, where the woman climbs up the roof, the kind of the sail, and jumps off into the water, how people actually took their lives into this water. And there's memory in the earth, and there's memory in all of those things that we just kind of fail to kind of acknowledge. And so I suppose in that screaming and the kind of way in which we are never actually deemed to be really of this place, as in of the UK, I've started to really think about how to be of it, even if someone says that I am not. And that is through those kind of related histories that are, really summed up in that really brilliant Ace of Anandan quote, we are here because you were there. This kind of like everything that is you have here is on account of me and my people, do you know what I mean? And on account of those kinds of things. And I think it's really, I don't know how we start to kind of articulate that, because back to that Guardian thing, there's still a lot of resistance to actually acknowledging the kinds of harm that is continuing to happen. And it makes me think of, makes me think about, there's a really rather unusual monument outside Brixton Police Station. that is kind of a virtual monument, really.
Okay.
There is a kind of like a what do you call it, a kind of box
Right.
that you can do, and a QR code.
Right.
And it's a virtual statue of Marcia Rigg,
Okay.
who, you know, if people don't know, is that like been tirelessly campaigning, not just for her brother, whose death in Shawn, whose death in the hands of the police is not really being resolved or at all, but, you know, the United Friends and Family, and many other people that have suffered at the hands of the authorities, not just the police, but also, you know, like hospital authorities and other such people. And, you know, I wonder how, I mean, I was present when it was, you know, I kind of happened to go down when it was being launched.
Is it a while ago?
It was actually not really. It was, I think it was the end of 2020 when we had a bit of time. There was, or maybe 2021, because there was a big project in Brixton which was called something like 81 Acts, because it was remembering the riots on the streets, and that was part of it. But I'm also kind of aware of our time, but I'm also kind of thinking about the kind of viability of that as another kind of possible remembrance. And I mean, I don't know how it's going to be received or how it's there now, and how long it would last.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm an ex-graffiti writer. I was never any good, but I was an ex-graffiti writer. So I love that kind of, you know, street art, whether it's funded or whether it's just someone with a spray can, or, do you know what I mean? The whole thing behind, you know, graffiti, the New York tradition of graffiti, getting your name up there, putting your name on a train because I exist, you know, everyone else is ignoring me, but I know I exist. So I'm going to stick my name on a train. So I love that kind of, I guess, that activist, that, you know, just getting your name up there, presence. I suppose it's about presence. It's about, I'm not invisible, I have a voice, you know, all of those kind of notions. So I do love that idea of this virtual memorials and these sort of subversions in the landscape that we might not always realize it's there, but it is there. And when we tune into it, there's another layer to get into, into acknowledge.
However, I want to dispute that one a little bit with the help of Gabrielle Seville, who made me realize something. I want to dispute that bit because I want to talk about, so I'm on the board at 198 Contemporary Arts and Learning, and we have a wall. Fortunately, we have a mural on the wall now which remembers the Brixton riots, which hasn't been kind of damaged, but we did have a piece by a Mexican American artist called Alicia Reyes McNamara, who had done some work in and around Brixton with some one of our communities, which is the Latinx community, which is, you know, which is very present, very much doing cleaning, domestic work in our areas. It's you know, it's quite a quiet community, but it's there, and you know, there's a lot of young people coming up through that. I've done some work with these girls, and we had, so that wall was kind of put over, and they did a paste up, because the wall is a kind of rolling gallery of like different murals and things. They did a paste up, which was painted over. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, because he came by, what is his name? Artful Dodger, with this kind of really, I would say, really bad, crude, piece with like Bart Simpson and Trump, right? And it was like, so it was like, oh wow, so certain history. So there's part of me that also sees that certain histories, and I got to say, you know, the kind of, although I do know female graffiti artists and they are doing a lot of, you know, kind of interesting work, you know, it's a very male territory. So what I want to pick up on in Gabrielle Seville's book is, when she opens Deja Vu, she talks about There's different kinds of monuments.
Mm.
And she talks about Oliver Stone's film World Trade being a monument, which actually remembers, you know, the World Trade Center. And then she talks about being in relationship with that and being disrupted by that, by seeing this monument to, and she's in Canada, to the death of a number of sex workers. Wow. And that was obviously made by her friends, their friends, and just kind of to remember them. But it was caked in graffiti, and particularly the kind of graffiti which is like, I would just say, like a dog pissing to create territory, you know, like tag, completely tagged. Now, the thing is, there is disruption, and then there is disruption, and there's disrespect, basically, as far as I'm concerned. I think that there is a fine line between that. I mean, fortunately, the one that we have that, you know, that's remembering the 81 riots has not been defaced, and you know, it's a beautiful offering from Jacob V. Joyce and the Rad Mural Collective. But I think that you know, it becomes a situation where, you know, as much as memory and histories are contested, that those spaces in which we you know, a history is remembered, like even thinking about outside Brixton Police Station, I think what might have been more powerful than the thing that's there right now, which is like placed by these benches where there's always a lot of like people sitting, mostly people who are drinking, sitting outside the police station, is the moment when we were there present. And, you know, Marcia was like speaking truth to power and shouting at the police station, you know. So I kind of, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a very contentious and difficult space, you know. But obviously, we need our memories. We need to remember whether these things are traumatic or joyous. We need to be able to kind of, they feed us and they teach us, right? Memory is like ultimate pedagogy. When I go back to the thinking about the Sankofa, you know, there is a poem that I'm not going to remember very well, or I could look up and I could try and remember, by a poet called A.K. Pimenta, that says something like, this bird is wise, it picks from the past that which is important, something like important for the present or for the future, to walk into the future undeterred. Like you can pick from it and learn from it. But I think one of the problematics, I think, with, like, say, with the Colston statue or things like that, and the kind of really sort of monumental ways, is this kind of fixing of, you know, like this kind of, you know, I think it's very masculine, this kind of fixing of memory, that just doesn't allow for the life, or the interior life, or the life, or the living. And I think that's something that I also fear in terms of, you know, how do we create archives, right? If we're going to create archives, are we creating archives in such a way that we throw them, you know? I wonder if we...
Yeah, we should. Thank you for that poem as well. I'm going to look that up. That was really beautiful. And I think
I'll send it to you. I wonder if we should ask, and if there's any questions that we want to answer.
Well,
gosh,
there's a few.
There's quite a lot.
Olivia, thanks. So sorry, Cleo above that. Hey, Cleo, former Lord Mayor of Bristol. Respect you, Cleo. Not a question, but can't share in the chat. So just open this link.
I'm just trying to read through them. I don't know. Cleo shared something. Olivia, thank you for this great discussion. I have a question about what you both were talking about on sonic quality of trauma, of finding the audible in between as a scream. I was wondering how you think people should reach for and communicate the stories of objects representing the history of the transatlantic slavery. I asked this as I myself am struggling to do this for my own work, looking at cast made by a cast made by a British colonialist, the skull of a Carib Kalingo of St. Vincent in the late 18th century. How can an object like this speak to its history of genocide, memory, and trauma? And as artists, both yourself, how did you respond to the ethical challenges of communicating or representing these historical stories? Oh,
Yeah.
I wonder if we can just ask a few, because I'm sure on the time we're going to, do we have any hopes and fears in relation to the influences of the current and future technologies in the scope of memory? There's one about personal memories of places could be memorialized and the importance of creating memory. So maybe we take those three, and if you want to pick something, Shawn. And then we can go
on. Can I take Depesh's first, I think? I'll come back to Olivia's, because that's a big one. I'm trying to unpick that one. Yeah, I think, so do you have any hopes or fears in relation to influences of current future technologies in the scope of memory? It's interesting, with all answers, you can answer them in so many different ways. I mean, one thing I think about with new technology, social media, everything disappearing into the social media space in terms of our photographs and our music and Spotify. I remember as a child going through my parents' record collection, you know what I mean? And we've already talked about photographs already, you know what I mean? But just that physicality of those things, even I'm at my mum's house now because I care for her during the week. And just so happened, I've got like Chuck Wagon Gang, which some of you might remember, Jim Reeves, and all these kind of things that our parents or some of our parents might have had in their record collections. And I find those things really interesting, and they're not as easy to go through when it's now all on social media and Spotify playlists and all those kind of things. So it's a bit of a practical one, but I think the physicality, being able to just go through a box and looking through the stuff that your parents owned, I think for those things are actually, they're really important. You know what I mean? And how do we navigate that space in the future when everything becomes digitized? You know what I mean? So they're the sort of things that I guess think about when it comes to memory and, I guess, family archives and these kind of things. They're the things that keep me awake at night, I think. You know what I mean?
I think because we haven't got much time, I want to go for Olivia's question. How can an object like this speak to its history of genocide? And oh gosh, it's so hard to think about that. But I think about how do we want to do that? I mean, I've seen different ways in which artists have used things like making the object speak or thinking about what the object might want to say. I'm thinking about, I think her name is Galia, who was recently, I can't remember the surname, but recently showed at Gasworks, and does a whole, I think that might be an interesting work for you to look at, because there was a whole way in which she has been working with objects to speak back to the organizations and to the histories that they have, that are kind of related to them. And it's, I mean, myself in some of my work, it's through presence in them in relation to the Queen's black-eyed squint, the presence of her walking through those streets with a kind of narrative that is kind of speaking back to that. And I think there's it's very hard being with the trauma. I mean, I certainly know that the object that Norbise Philip uses to make Zong, she lived with that for a very long time. And I know that even being with that object caused a feeling of trauma. So I really can't speak to exactly how it would occur for you, but I can really, I don't know, maybe you don't want to show that object again, or maybe you want to kind of, speak back somehow to how it's represented in the collection. With the personal memories of places, how could that be memorialized? Well, I do walks. Actually, Burke, I do walks in Brixton. I've done a few walks with people, and we've just kind of done like rituals of like reading on these streets. I did a reading around the British Black Panthers in Brixton and stuff. And I feel it's difficult though, because you see, when I'm gone, or when other people have gone who also do walks, what happens? I don't know. But I think there is something I can do that also because I live in Brixton, but also, and I was born in Brixton, and there's not very many of us left, if you know what I'm saying. Gosh, how long have we got? Because
I think we got half past. I think we got 20 minutes.
Have we?
Yeah.
Are we finishing at 1:30? Oh, okay, so we don't need to rush through them.
Oh, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. We have 5 minutes.
My math was never my strong point.
Are you looking at this? Yes, Grenfell Tower, historical major social movements. Gosh, there's so many questions. I'm interested in hearing your views on the intersection of popular music and politics. I'm just reading that I think music is really, really key and important in terms of memory. I don't know if you have a brain like mine, I have a song for everything. Like, I don't know about you, Shawn. I mean, you picked up some vinyl, and it's really important. I think particularly Black music is our archive.
Yeah,
like it's much more of an archive, and it's a visceral one. It's you know, it's not just about what's on the vinyl or what's on the digital. It's actually also about the way in which the music has embodied you. You know, I was doing some work with the DJ Lene Denise, and we were talking about Bunny Mac's Sweetie Sugar, and you know, and I was talking about how, you know, it's kind of lives in my body through listening. And yeah, I think that it's really important, and there's nothing more like hip hop or kind of, you know, other musics that, you know, high life, all of these that tell are so deeply related to storytelling that they are an archive in itself. Yeah, Grenfell Tower is a memorial.
I mean, as someone who didn't know Grenfell before what happened, and I went there a couple of months later to just to show my respects and to pass through the space, and you know, seeing the different forms of ways that people wanted to just put a marker down, whether it's flowers or whether it's, you know, these different ways. But as you say, it's kind of, you know, still wrapped. It was just, yeah, it was one of those moments. It was just speechless. And as you say, I didn't want to take photographs. There's even a sign that says, "Be careful before you take out your camera."
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I think it's really key.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said at the very beginning, just that embodied, you know, it wasn't a dance, wasn't just from being there. And
you feel it.
It's in your body. Yeah, absolutely.
We need to start wrapping up, but there's something, it's Anthony Kalume was talking about some things that cannot be destroyed, simple incorporation of African language into English vocabulary, plus intangible influences keeps me strong. Can we elaborate on these iconic symbols? I was listening this morning to, I love what you're saying, because I was listening to this morning, or was it yesterday? I'm very obsessed with Bayo Akamalafe. And I was listening to one of his podcasts, and he says this several times about Eshu, the Yoruba god, kind of stowing away on the slave ships. And we can think about a lot of our Sankofa and other things that stowed away on slave ships, and kind of the drum, all of these things, this kind of language that is iconic and has not been broken, which is actually probably more powerful in lots of ways than a document. And I think we do celebrate them in a kind of everyday presence, and also as they morph and change into different kinds of music or different kinds of ways of being represented, or, you know, different ways in which we, you know, embody them, like the Sankofa tattoos that me and Shawn both have on our legs. So many questions. I don't know if we've got
time. Also, can we save these questions? Will they be saved? Because I think this is, yeah, I think there's more to reflect on, really.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think so. And I think it's been a really fruitful discussion. And I'm really, yeah, it's been really great, Shawn, and really great to have you all here present with us. I'm sorry that we didn't get through everybody's questions. As we said, we'll keep these questions, and maybe, you know, when it's online, maybe we can look at them and we can you know, provide some sort of answers or some directions or something.
And it's interesting because having this in conversation, I think we're both slightly, you know, nervous or cautious. Like, how is this going to work? Just a conversation. But it's been a pleasure, absolute pleasure, to have this conversation with you.
Yeah,
we didn't know where it was going to go. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Shawn.
So over to Asante.
Thank you both so much. I think that was probably the most kind of audience interaction we've had on one of these Reconstruction Work talks. So it is a live discussion, and I think the beautiful thing about these conversations is that they are incredibly open-ended. There's absolutely no way to cover the topics that it's not even conceivable that we could cover, you know, the range and the breadth of all the things that we could talk about. But what's really great about these discussions is that it provides it provides a not necessarily an entry point, but a point where we can kind of build from to consolidate ideas and to think from these positions. So thank you both so much for your time and for your energies. And I know it's been an incredibly busy time for both of you. Thank you to our audiences. Thank you for everyone that's joined in, to our captioner. Thank you so much to Tayyib, our tech support, our brilliant tech support. And thank you to Code as well for helping produce this event. And if you're unaware of Code, please do look them up. They're doing excellent work. And thank you all for your brilliant questions and your energy on the other side of the screen. So the recording will be available and free to access in the next couple of weeks or so. So do sign up to our newsletter and our social media channels to stay up to date. And keep an eye on the Explore section of our website, as well as our ever-growing free to access learning resources, which this will be a part of. So you'll be able to, you know, access this and to give it a listen and to think through some of these ideas in whichever way you'd like. And we're also thrilled to announce, as a foundation, the conversation continues. We are still listening, which is a newly commissioned audio-based artwork by Trevor Matheson that the foundation has been working on with Trevor for quite some time now, and we're really proud and happy to say that we'll be there's a preview event on the 9th of June that will be taking place at Highgate, but there will also be a virtual event where Trevor will be talking about the work with Asia Lodi, and the work responds imaginatively to Stuart Hall's chosen place of rest at Highgate Cemetery in London. So please do tune into the preview event. There's more information about that on the website. And Tayyib has has placed it into the chat there. And just as a final note, we're a very small charity with massive ambitions, and there's only 4 members of staff. So part of what helps us tick over, what helps us keep us going, is is your donations and your support. So that support can come in any form. With, you know, you can hit the follow button or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or to subscribe to our mailing list, which is also huge. And if you are able to, then monetary donations are always accepted via our website. Our goal is to try and keep these conversations going and to try and keep them free to access and accessible. So any help is always appreciated. So thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Barbie. Thank you, Shawn. It's been excellent. Bye, everyone. Take care.